Dr. Ilara Voss stood at the edge of the observation deck, gazing out at the sprawling city of Eridath below. The sun of Rillan Prime bathed the towering spires in a golden light, a peaceful scene that felt worlds apart from the chaos she had spent her days battling in the sterile white walls of the medical complex. It was a momentary respite, one she cherished. For a doctor like Ilara, peace was rare. It was why she'd chosen to work on Rillan Prime in the first place, a planet that balanced a diverse and thriving ecosystem with a stable society. But even here, in this idyllic setting, there were whispers. Rumors of something dark growing in the corners of the galaxy. Something dangerous. Something that none of the galaxy's great governments could control. Ilara turned her attention back to the lab reports she had been reviewing on her tablet. Over the past few weeks, she'd noticed an alarming trend among the new patients coming through her clinic. The virus was nothing she had seen before. It wasn't just an infectious agent, it was adaptive, mutating faster than any known pathogen. What was more troubling was that it didn't seem to follow the usual protocols of transmission. It didn't care about bloodlines, species, or the usual barriers. It affected every race it encountered with terrifying efficiency. "I've analyzed every possible origin," Ilara muttered to herself, shaking her head. "Nothing matches any known pathogens, nothing." She clicked through more data, each new report sending a shiver down her spine. None of her colleagues seemed as alarmed as she was. Perhaps they couldn't see what she saw, or perhaps they were too focused on the surface details to notice the deeper, more unsettling pattern. But Ilara had trained her entire life to spot what others missed, and what she saw terrified her. The disease was evolving at a pace that shouldn't have been possible, too rapidly for natural mutation. It was as though someone, or something, was engineering it. Her thoughts were interrupted when her assistant, Dr. Mara Finn, entered the room. Her face was pale, and her eyes wide with concern. "Ilara, you need to see this." Without waiting for a response, Mara activated the holoscreen behind her, which flickered to life with a transmission from a far-flung colony on the planet Orcs. The image was grainy, but the message was clear. A transmission from the Orcs colony's last survivor. "Ilara," the voice crackled. "It's the Jarath. They're here. They started it. We tried to warn you, but it's too late." The transmission cut out, leaving only static. Ilara's blood ran cold. She'd heard of the Jarath, a ruthless alien race that had been on the fringes of galactic reports for years. But until now, they'd been more myth than reality. Fierce, barbaric, and deeply territorial, they were a race that invaded worlds, never to negotiate, only to conquer. Ilara's mind raced. If the Jarath were connected to the disease, then this was no longer just a viral outbreak. It was an invasion. The Jarath were never known to leave survivors. "Contact the planetary defense," Ilara ordered, trying to steady her shaking hands. But she already knew it wouldn't be enough. The Jarath's warships were known for their devastating efficiency. If they had arrived, it was already too late for any conventional defense. Mara's voice wavered. "Ilara, we need to leave. Now." But Ilara wasn't listening. A thought had crossed her mind, and with it, a terrifying realization. The disease. Was it really a disease? Or was it something far more sinister? A weapon? If it was, then the Jarath had already infected their target. The peaceful days of Rillan Prime were over, and for the first time in her life, Ilara felt the full weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. "Get me to the research lab," she said, her voice colder than she expected. "I think I know what we're dealing with." As the doors of the medical complex closed behind her, she knew the battle had just begun. The city of Eridath had never felt so still, as though the very air had grown heavy in anticipation. Ilara moved through the corridors of the medical complex, her mind racing, her pulse quickening. What she had seen in the transmission, the desperation in the survivor's voice, the sudden coldness of the Jarath's approach, was something she couldn't shake. She was no longer just a doctor working with patients. She was a witness to the start of something catastrophic. The hum of the complex's automated systems was deafening in the silence, and as Ilara entered her lab, she quickly pulled up the Latest data on the disease. A knot tightened in her stomach. The pathogen was mutating faster now, and it had begun to show signs of intelligence. It was almost as if the disease was evolving on purpose, guided by an unseen force. This wasn't just a viral outbreak. It was a tool, a weapon, and it was connected to the Jarath. Mara's voice interrupted her thoughts. Ilara, you need to see this. Ilara glanced up, her mind already preparing for the worst. But nothing could prepare her for what she saw next. The window on the far side of the lab shattered in an instant, and a blast of air rushed in as debris scattered across the floor. Ilara stumbled back, the sound of the explosion ringing in her ears. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. What the hell? Ilara shouted, instinctively ducking for cover. Outside, the sky had turned dark, with the shape of massive ships descending from orbit. They were unlike anything Ilara had ever seen, sleek, jagged, and massive. As they hovered above the city, the air was filled with the low hum of their engines, a sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones. The Jarath were here. Mara was already at the door, peering out into the street below. It's starting, she whispered, her face pale. They're attacking the city. A loud roar echoed from the distance, followed by a barrage of explosions. The ground beneath their feet trembled as a shockwave rattled the walls. The first wave of Jarath troops stormed the streets. They were like nothing Ilara had ever imagined, hulking armored creatures with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes, their armor gleaming in the dim light. They moved with terrifying precision, using advanced weapons that tore through buildings with ease. They're not here for us, they're here for you, Mara said, her voice shaking. Ilara, they know you're the one who discovered the cure. You have to leave. Now. Ilara's heart raced as the reality of the situation set, and the Jarath had been watching them, waiting. She knew that the cure she'd discovered was more than just a treatment for the disease. It was a weapon, one that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. If the Jarath got their hands on it, the galaxy would be theirs to control. But Ilara wasn't just going to run. She wasn't going to abandon everything she had worked for, especially when so many innocent lives were at risk. She grabbed her emergency med kit and stuffed it into her bag, her hands moving with practiced speed. We don't have time to waste. We need to get to the underground tunnels. Mara hesitated. But the Jarath, I'm not leaving without doing everything I can to stop them. Ilara cut her off, her voice steely. And I'm not going to let them turn this cure into a weapon. The blast doors to the lab opened, and Ilara sprinted toward the exit, pulling Mara along with her. Outside chaos had erupted. People were running through the streets trying to flee, but the Jarath had already begun rounding them up, corralling them into makeshift containment zones. We need to get to the shipyard, Ilara said, her mind working quickly. There's an old transport ship there. It's our only way off the planet. As they ran, the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burning metal. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, and every step she took felt heavier than the last. They dodged debris, ducked under falling structures, and maneuvered through panicked crowds. But it was clear the Jarath were already too organized. They knew exactly what they were doing. When they finally reached the shipyard, Ilara spotted the transport ship, a rusty freighter that hadn't seen use in years. It was their only hope of escaping this nightmare. She could see figures already, gathered around it, rebel fighters, smugglers, and civilians. Koran, the man who had helped them in the past, stood near the hatch waiting. Ilara, Koran called out, his expression grim. It's worse than we thought. The Jarath aren't just invading, they're wiping us out. We need to go, now. Ilara didn't hesitate. She rushed toward the ship, her thoughts already on what lay ahead. The galaxy was in flames, and she was about to become a key player in a war that was bigger than anything she could have imagined. But she wasn't just running for her life. She was running to stop the Jarath. If she failed, there would be no turning back. As the hatch closed behind her, Ilara took one last look at the planet she had called home. Rylan Prime was burning, and the galaxy was about to be plunged into chaos. The Jarath were just the beginning, and Alara knew, deep in her bones, that the fight was far from over. The engines of the transport ship hummed as it streaked across the darkening skies of Rylan Prime, leaving behind a planet descending into chaos. Alara sat strapped into a seat, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the datapad displaying the cure she'd spent years perfecting. Her mind raced faster than the ship's engines. The Jarath were more than just an invading force. They were an extinction-level threat, and she had unwittingly handed them the key to weaponizing the cure she had worked so tirelessly to develop. Beside her, Mara's voice was tense as she spoke into her comms, coordinating with rebel forces scattered throughout the galaxy. "We're clear for now," Mara said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "But they'll be tracking us soon. We need to get to the safe zone." Alara nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. "Where's the nearest safe haven?" "Arcadia Station," Corin answered, his face as grim as ever. "It's a rebel base hidden from the Jarath's radar. If we can make it there, we'll have the support we need to keep the cure out of the wrong hands." Alara glanced at him, noting the hard set of his jaw. She still wasn't sure if she could fully trust him, but in this war they needed allies, no matter the cost. Corin had been a mercenary, a fighter for hire, until the Jarath's brutality had turned him into a reluctant ally of the Resistance. His skills and knowledge of the galaxy's underworld made him invaluable, but his motives remained unclear. There was something about his past that still haunted him, something he hadn't shared yet. The flight to Arcadia Station was tense. Outside the transport windows, stars streaked past as the ship entered a low-speed warp, leaving behind the burning remains of Rylan Prime. Ilara's thoughts drifted back to the city, to the faces of the patients she'd treated, the families she'd helped. It was hard to accept that everything she'd known was gone. The Jarath had attacked with precision, overwhelming the planet's defenses and leaving nothing in their wake but destruction. When they finally arrived at Arcadia Station, Alara felt a strange sense of relief. The massive space station hovered on the fringes of uncharted space, hidden in the asteroid field of the Varan Belt. Its metallic surface gleamed like a fortress, and the corridors inside were bustling with resistance fighters, smugglers, and scientists, people from all walks of life united by one goal: to stop the Jarath. A middle-aged woman in a tactical suit, Commander Rhaegar, greeted them at the docking bay. Her piercing green eyes locked onto Alara's as she approached, her hand extended in a firm handshake. "Dr. Voss, I presume. We've been expecting you." Commander Rhaegar's voice was authoritative, but not unkind. "The Jarath aren't the only ones after that cure, you know. There are factions in the galaxy who would use it to their advantage just as ruthlessly." Alara raised an eyebrow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the moment you unleashed that cure, you made yourself a target," Rhaegar continued. "There are empires, corporations, and even factions within the rebellion that will do whatever it takes to control it." The words hit Alara harder than she anticipated. She had known that the cure was valuable, but the idea that it was a coveted asset, one that could determine the fate of entire star systems, was overwhelming. Corin stepped forward. "So what's the plan, Commander? We're not just here to hide out. We need to stop the Jarath, and we need to keep that cure out of their hands." Rhaegar's gaze shifted to the datapad in Alara's hands. "We need to synthesize the cure into a form that can be distributed on a large scale," she said, her tone sharp. "But before we do that, we need to understand exactly how the Jarath have manipulated it. If we don't get the science right, it could backfire." Alara nodded, knowing she was the one who could make that difference. "I have to finish the research. I'll need resources, labs, secure communications, access to databases from the outer colonies." Rhaegar regarded her for a long moment. "I'm sure you'll have everything you need," she said. "But be warned, no one is safe from the Jarath's reach. We've already lost several key cells in the Resistance. They are relentless, and they know we're coming for them." Corin spoke up again, his eyes narrowed. "We've already lost Rylan Prime. We can't lose this station too." Rhaegar gave him a hard look, then turned to Alara. "We'll do everything we can to protect this station, but you need to prepare yourself, Doctor. This isn't just a medical crisis anymore, it's a war. The Jarath are coming, and they won't stop until they have what they want." Alara's chest tightened as the gravity of the situation settled in her. The fight was no longer about saving a single planet or species. It was a fight for the future of the entire galaxy. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the datapad. "Then we'll fight. We have no choice." And as she followed Rhaegar deeper into the resistance base, she realized that this war would take everything from her. But if it meant stopping the Jarath and saving countless lives, she would do whatever it took. The galaxy was counting on her now, and she wasn't about to let it fall. Alara sat at a makeshift workbench in one of the deeper chambers of Arcadia Station, surrounded by glowing monitors displaying genetic data, chemical formulas, and viral structures. She barely noticed the flickering lights overhead or the hum of the station's engines, her focus entirely consumed by the cure and the terrifying implications of what she was learning. Days had passed since she'd arrived at the station, and her work had become a blur of tests, data analysis, and frantic calculations. Every time she thought she'd uncovered the secret to the Jarath's disease, another layer of complexity would emerge, pushing her deeper into a rabbit hole. This wasn't a simple viral outbreak. It was a biological weapon engineered with a sophistication she couldn't fully comprehend. "What do you mean it's alive?" Mara's voice echoed from the doorway, cutting through Alara's concentration. Alara blinked and turned, seeing her assistant standing in the doorway, a concerned expression etched on her face. Mara had been her anchor throughout the chaos, but now, even she seemed unsettled by the weight of the situation. Alara rubbed her eyes, exhausted. "I don't know how else to describe it, Mara. The disease. It's not just a virus anymore. It's evolving, adapting, and it's learning like it has its own kind of intelligence." Mara stepped into the lab, looking over the data on Alara's screen. "So, it's not natural?" "No," Alara replied firmly. "It's been engineered, but by who and why I'm still trying to figure out." She paused, the truth dawning on her as she stared at the swirling mass of data. "I think I've been working under the wrong assumption. This disease isn't just some biological weapon. It's a tool to create something worse. A super soldier." Mara's eyes widened. "A super soldier?" "Yes," Alara confirmed, her voice tight. "The pathogen alters the genetic makeup of those it infects. It's not just about spreading the disease, it's about turning infected individuals into something else, something stronger, faster, controlled." Mara recoiled, horror crossing her face. "You're telling me the Jarath have been creating an army with this?" Alara nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I think has been happening. The Jarath are turning entire populations into weapons, and they've been using this disease to accelerate their conquests. And the cure? The cure is the key to neutralizing it, if we can get it to the right people in time." Mara's voice was low, barely a whisper. "But if the Jarath have control over it, who else could want it? Who else might try to use it to their advantage?" Before Alara could answer, the door to the lab slid open again, and Commander Rhaegar entered, flanked by a handful of resistance fighters. The sharp scent of gun oil and sweat clung to them, a testament to their constant readiness for the fight. "Alara, we need to talk," Rhaegar said, her tone all business. "There's been a development." Alara pushed back from her workstation, brow furrowed. "What's happened?" Rhaegar stepped closer, her face hardening with urgency. "The Jarath have launched an attack on one of our forward bases. It's a diversion. They're searching for something or someone. We believe they've located the location of the cure." Ilara's stomach tightened. "And what if they've already found it?" Rhaegar's eyes narrowed. "Then it's over. They'll have access to every star system they want. But there's something else. Something worse." Rhaegar handed Alara a small device, an encrypted holoscreen. The image flickered to life, displaying a heavily armored figure, barely visible through the distortion of static. The figure was humanoid, but its movements were unnatural, jerky, as though it were different. It wore a helmet with jagged edges, and the voice that crackled from the device was cold and mechanical. "This is Jareth Commander Kethar," the voice said, distorted but unmistakably commanding. "The virus will succeed. The future of our species will be forged in the fires of this galaxy, and those who stand in our way will be erased." The transmission cut off abruptly, but the damage was done. Alara felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "Is that one of their soldiers?" Rhaegor grimaced. "We believe it's one of the super soldiers created by the disease. What you've been working on is no longer just a cure. It's a weapon to create these abominations, and the Jarath are ready to deploy them across the galaxy." Alara's heart pounded in her chest. The stakes had just escalated. The disease she had hoped to control had already been twisted into something unrecognizable, a force that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. Her eyes locked onto the device in her hand, and her mind spun with the weight of the information. This wasn't just about stopping a biological weapon anymore. It was about preventing a new kind of war, a war where the lines between human and monster would be blurred beyond recognition. "If we don't stop them now," Alara said, her voice steady but full of resolve, "we won't just be fighting for the cure. We'll be fighting for the very future of the galaxy." The air on Arcadia Station had grown thick with tension. Alara could feel it in the way the rebels moved with greater urgency, their eyes constantly flicking toward the communication panels, waiting for reports for news of the Jarath's next move. Every corner of the station seemed to be alive with the sound of orders being barked, equipment being prepped, and soldiers gearing up. It was the calm before a storm that no one was sure they could weather. Alara clutched the datapad tightly in her hands, the same one that held the genetic code she had worked so tirelessly to perfect. The cure was meant to save lives, to heal the infected, to stop the Jarath's weapon from spreading. Now it had become a battleground in itself, an asset so powerful it could reshape the galaxy. But it was also a ticking time bomb. Whoever controlled it would control the fate of everyone. The resistance had mobilized. Arcadia Station's forces were making preparations to launch a counterattack, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the Jarath were already planning their own strike. "We can't wait any longer." Rhaegor's voice cut through Alara's thoughts. She looked up from her workbench to see the commander standing at the door, her face hard and resolved. "The Jarath have already compromised one of our forward bases, and they're getting closer. We need to strike first." Alara hesitated. "Strike how? If we attack them, we risk losing everything, the cure, the station, all of us. We have to think this through." "We don't have the luxury of time," Rhaegor countered, her voice steely. "The longer we wait, the more the Jarath gain. We need to hit them where it hurts before they can deploy their super soldiers across the galaxy." Corran, standing nearby with his arms crossed, added, "I agree with Rhaegor. If we let them come to us, we're playing into their hands. But if we hit them hard and fast, we might stand a chance." Alara swallowed hard. She didn't like it, but Corran was right. If they stayed passive, the Jarath would only grow stronger. She could already picture the horrors of entire star systems falling under their control, each one transformed into a breeding ground for super soldiers. She couldn't let that happen, not after everything she had sacrificed. "All right," Alara said, her voice filled with determination. "What's the plan?" Rhaegor motioned to the hollow table in the center of the room, and the map of the galaxy flickered to life. "We've pinpointed a Jarath command ship near the Aruva Nebula. It's heavily protected, but it's also vulnerable. We're going to hit it with a surprise attack. Our goal isn't just to destroy the ship, but to capture it. If we can take control of their command center, we'll disrupt their ability to coordinate their forces. We'll have a chance to strike back." The implications were staggering. If they succeeded, they might buy the galaxy enough time to regroup, to build a coordinated resistance. But if they failed, if the ship is as heavily guarded as you say, how are we going to get inside? Alara asked, narrowing her eyes. Corran stepped forward. "We'll infiltrate using a small strike team. I've got a few mercenary contacts who owe me favors. They're willing to help with the breach." We'll plant explosives in key areas of the ship's infrastructure, disable its communication systems, and make sure the Jarath can't use it to direct their forces. Meanwhile, He paused, looking at Alara. You'll be the one to get to the Jarath central database. You're the only one who can stop them from using the cure. Alara nodded. She understood the task ahead of her. She wasn't just going to be fighting for her life. She was going to be fighting for the lives of countless others. She had to finish what she'd started. How long do we have? She asked. Rhaegor didn't hesitate. A few hours. The Jarath won't expect us to come after them so quickly. But once we hit them, they'll retaliate. Hard. Then we better make it count, Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the cold fear that crept into her chest. As the plan was set into motion, Ilara gathered her medical kit, now modified with a set of tools to hack into the Jarath's database. The rest of the resistance fighters were already preparing for battle, gearing up, checking weapons, and making sure they were ready for whatever lay ahead. The air was thick with tension, but there was a fire in Ilara's chest now, a fire that couldn't be extinguished. She had come too far, she had too much to lose. And no matter what it took, she was going to stop the Jarath. Stay focused, Rhaegor said, her voice low and commanding. We do this, we win. But if we fail... Ilara didn't let her finish. She knew what the stakes were. If we fail, Ilara said, meeting Rhaegor's eyes with resolve, we don't have a galaxy left to save. And with that, the strike was set into motion. The rebellion's first real chance at stopping the Jarath, and the clock was ticking. The transport ship hummed in the cold vacuum of space as Ilara and the strike team made their way toward the Jarath command ship. The quiet hum was a stark contrast to the storm raging in Ilara's chest. The weight of the mission pressed heavily on her mind. This wasn't just a strike against the Jarath. It was a gamble, one that could either shift the tide of the war or doom them all to extinction. Ilara adjusted her grip on the tools she had brought with her. They weren't just for medical use anymore. Now they would help her hack into the Jarath's central systems, disrupt their control over the cure, and maybe, just maybe, turn the tide in favor of the galaxy's resistance. Corran sat across from her, his sharp eyes scanning the readings on his datapad. The others were silent, lost in their thoughts as the ship moved deeper into the nebula. Their faces were grim, all aware of the stakes, but none of them were ready to voice the fear they all felt. For most, this was the final mission, a do-or-die opportunity. You're sure this is going to work? Ilara asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Corran's eyes met hers, and he gave a small, cynical smile. If we don't make it, then at least we'll go down knowing we gave them a hell of a fight. The words, though intended to reassure, only added to the weight on her shoulders. Corran's brand of dark humor was a reminder of how dire the situation truly was. They were heading into enemy territory, and there was no guarantee they would come out alive. As the nebula loomed ahead, the faint glow of distant stars flickered through the thick mist. It was a breathtaking sight, but Ilara couldn't afford to be distracted. She had to focus. Her mind was already working through the plan, the infiltration, the sabotage, and the most critical task of all, getting to the Jarath database and neutralizing the threat. She couldn't afford to let her concentration slip. The transport ship shuddered as it passed through a dense field of asteroids, the ship's cloaking system kicking in just in time to avoid detection. The Jarath's defenses were strong, but this was a blind spot. The ship's maneuvering systems allowed them to slip through undetected. Approaching target, Rhaegar's voice crackled through the comms, drawing everyone's attention. We'll be within range in 10 minutes, prepare for the drop. Ilara's stomach tightened. This was it, the point of no return. There would be no turning back once they landed on the Jarath ship. She glanced around at the rest of the team, her heart beating faster. They were all here for the same reason, to protect the galaxy from the Jarath's destructive reach. Each of them had their own reasons for joining the fight, but now, their lives were intertwined by one singular goal. They were a unit, and, together, they would either succeed or fail. The ship began to slow as they neared the massive Jarath vessel. It was a hulking thing, bristling with weapons and shields, its black surface scarred from years of battle. The sheer scale of the ship made it look like a moving fortress, a symbol of the Jareth's power and intent. Ilara felt a pang of fear, but she buried it deep inside. There was no room for fear now. Her thoughts shifted to the cure, to the thousands of lives at stake. If she failed, the Jareth would have the power to spread their corruption across the galaxy. But if she succeeded... The comms crackled again, Rhaegar's voice coming through. "We're in position. Get ready to deploy." Ilara's pulse quickened. It was time. The drop was quick. The transport ship's doors opened and Ilara was the first to step into the waiting pod. Her heart raced as the world outside the shuttle darkened, and she could see the outline of the Jareth ship looming ahead. The mission was simple, but its complexity would leave no room for error. They had to reach the core of the ship, plant the explosives and disable the Jareth's communications, all while keeping the enemy off their backs. And Ilara had one more crucial task: to access the central database and disrupt the Jareth's use of the cure. As they dropped toward the command ship's surface, Ilara's thoughts sharpened. This wasn't just about stopping the Jareth. This was about saving everything they had left. The resistance, the cure, the galaxy. It all hinged on this one strike. When the pod touched down with a soft thud, the door hissed open, and they were on the ship. The air was thick with the smell of metal and burning electronics. Ilara was the first to move, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridors. The Jareth didn't rely on traditional lighting. They used a cold, harsh illumination that gave the ship an eerie, clinical feel. It was as if the ship itself was a sterile laboratory, one where creatures were bred, engineered, and turned into weapons. The strike team moved with military precision, slipping through the hallways with practiced ease. Their boots were silent, on the metal floors, and their weapons ready. Ilara kept her head low, focusing on the mission. They had one chance. One shot to get it right. The countdown to chaos had begun. The corridors of the Jareth command ship were eerily quiet, the hum of the engines vibrating through the floors beneath their feet. Ilara's breath came in measured gasps, each step bringing her closer to the heart of the beast. The ship was alive with the quiet whisper of automated systems and the occasional distant clamor of Jareth soldiers moving through the ship's labyrinthine hallways. The team moved quickly, staying in the shadows, always alert. The flickering lights above them cast long, strange shadows that twisted along the walls, making the ship feel even more alien and threatening. Each turn, each narrow corridor felt like a countdown to something worse than the enemies they already knew. Ilara was focused on the mission. She had been trained as a doctor, yes, but in this moment she had become something else entirely: a warrior, a hacker, a savior. Her mind was sharp, laser-focused on the task at hand. Find the central database, upload the disruptor code, and get out before the Jareth found them. But even as she calculated every move, part of her couldn't help but feel the overwhelming weight of the galaxy's fate pressing down on her. "Moving to your position," Corrin's voice came over the comms, his words terse. He and Mara were scouting ahead, ensuring the way was clear. Ilara kept her pace steady, her fingers twitching with the anticipation of what was to come. Each moment was a delicate balance of time and danger. If they could get to the Jareth central database, she could finally end this nightmare. But the closer they got to the heart of the ship, the more she felt the oppressive weight of something looming in the distance. There was something else aboard this vessel, something that wasn't part of the original mission plan. "Commander Rhaegar," Ilara murmured over the comms, her voice barely audible. "Do you feel that? Something's off. This ship doesn't feel like a military vessel. It's too quiet, too clinical." Rhaegar's voice crackled back, low and steady. "Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into. Keep your focus on the mission." The words were meant to calm her, but they only fueled her anxiety. She had been through enough battles to know that the unknown was always the most dangerous aspect of any operation. Something about this ship felt wrong, as though it was watching them, waiting. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed down the hall, a soft scraping noise, followed by the unmistakable clanking of metal boots. The sound grew, louder, closer. They weren't alone anymore. "Ambush," Corin hissed, his voice urgent. "Get to cover, they've found us." Ilara's heart raced and she spun toward a nearby alcove, sliding into the shadows as the sound of Jarath soldiers grew louder. There were at least a dozen of them, moving with purpose, weapons raised. Their faces were cold and unfeeling beneath their helmets, each of them a part of the unstoppable machine that was the Jarath war machine. She could hear the pounding of their boots on the floor, the rhythmic approach of death. "Plan B," Rhaegor's voice rang out through the comms, sharp. "We fight our way through, take them down fast." Ilara barely had time to register the command before Corin and Mara sprang into action, moving with lethal precision. Corin's blaster crackled to life, sending arcs of energy lancing through the air, striking down the first few Jarath soldiers with brutal accuracy. Mara followed suit, taking cover and firing her weapon with quick, practiced motions. The Jarath soldiers returned fire, their energy weapons screaming through the air. The sound was deafening in the narrow hallways, the walls shaking with the force of the blasts. Ilara's pulse quickened as she ducked behind a nearby pillar, her mind whirling. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't trained for this. But the urgency of the situation kept her moving. Her hands were steady as she activated the disruptor code, the data stream flashing across her wrist pad. "Disruptors uploading now," Ilara muttered under her breath, keeping her eyes fixed on the advancing enemy. "It'll only take a few more seconds, keep them busy." Corin and Mara didn't need to be told twice. They pressed forward, pushing the Jarath soldiers back, forcing them into a retreat. The crackle of blaster fire continued to fill the air, but their assault was relentless. Suddenly, a blast from a Jarath soldier's weapon came too close, clipping Mara's shoulder. She stumbled, cursing as she caught herself but continued firing. Blood stained her jacket, but she wasn't stopping. Not now, not ever. Ilara's eyes widened as she glanced over at her. "Mara, you're hit." "I'm fine," Mara gritted, through clenched teeth, her eyes flashing with defiance. "We don't have time for this, Doc. Keep working." The seconds felt like hours as Ilara finished uploading the disruptor code, praying it would work in time. Her fingers danced across the datapad with urgency, her heart racing as the countdown ticked closer. The Jarath had to be stopped. Finally, the device beeped once, then twice. The code was in. A surge of energy vibrated through the ship. The lights flickered as the disruption hit the Jarath network, their communication systems collapsing in on themselves. The soldiers paused, confusion spreading like wildfire among them. "We've got a window," Corin yelled. "Move!" With the Jarath forces temporarily incapacitated, the team pushed forward, leaving the chaos behind. But Ilara knew this was only the beginning. They were on the edge of something bigger now, and no matter how hard they fought, the true battle was still ahead. The chaos inside the Jarath command ship hadn't subsided. In fact, it was just beginning. With the disruptor code now in their systems, the ship was in disarray, communications were down, and the Jarath soldiers were scrambling to regain control of their command network. For a brief, fleeting moment, Ilara felt a sense of hope. They had done it. They had created a gap, a weakness that could be exploited. But as they moved deeper into the ship, that hope was tempered by the realization that this was far from over. The central database was still ahead, and with every step they took, the risk of running into more enemies increased. "Keep moving," Rhaegar ordered, her voice low and commanding as she led the way through the twisting halls. "We've bought ourselves some time, but it won't last long. The Jarath will adapt, and they'll adapt fast." Ilara kept her head down, focusing on the task ahead. The strain of the mission was starting to catch up with her. Her muscles ached and her heart thudded painfully in her chest. But she couldn't afford to stop now. There was no room for exhaustion, no room for hesitation. Not when the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Karan was at the front of the group, moving silently, his blaster ready, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Mara was close behind, still bleeding but showing no sign of slowing down. Every step was a battle, but every step also brought them closer to their goal, the Jarath Central Database, where they could finally shut down the use of the cure and prevent the super soldier program from spreading further. As they neared the heart of the ship, a thick metallic door loomed before them, the entrance to the central hub. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. This was it. They were almost there. But even as she steeled herself for what was to come, she felt a shiver run down her spine. "Ready?" Corin asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Ilara nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Rhaegar gave a quick hand signal, and Corin set to work on the door's security lock. Ilara glanced around nervously, half expecting Jarath reinforcements to appear from the shadows. But it was too quiet, too still. Then the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside the central hub was a massive, circular room, filled with rows of consoles and glowing data terminals. The walls were lined with screens showing various sectors of the ship, while in the center of the room stood a massive, sleek control panel, a giant, glowing interface that looked like the heart of the ship itself. And there, just beyond the central terminal, was a wall of reinforced glass housing the Jarath database. Ilara could see it now. The lifeblood of the Jarath war machine, the knowledge and power that had been used to control and manipulate entire civilizations. She could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of the task ahead. Before they could move, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the room. The door had been breached. Jarath soldiers were closing in, their footfalls heavy as they rushed into the chamber. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The distraction wouldn't last long. "Go, now!" Rhaegar shouted, signaling for them to move forward. Corin and Mara immediately took up positions, weapons raised, while Ilara rushed toward the central terminal, her hands shaking as she set her datapad into the slot. A few seconds later, the interface sparked to life, displaying a series of complex codes and security layers. She quickly began the process of infiltrating the database, but as her fingers flew across the keys, the sounds of blaster fire filled the air. The Jarath soldiers had arrived. "We need to move," Mara yelled, dodging a blast and firing back. With precision, Ilara's breath was tight in her chest, but she couldn't look away from the terminal. The disruptor code was running, and the information she needed to stop the Jarath was within reach. She had to be quick. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway, a hulking silhouette, one that towered above the rest. It was the same creature Ilara had seen on the encrypted transmission, the Jarath commander Cathar. He moved with unnatural speed, his movements jerky but deliberate, his armor clanging with each step. "Do you think you can stop this?" Cathar's voice was cold and mechanical, a twisted mockery of life. Ilara's blood ran cold. This was the creature the disease had created. This was what she had feared. Without thinking, she hit the final command on her datapad, sending the disruptor code into overdrive. The database began to glitch, its security systems failing as her hack took root. But Cathar wasn't finished. With a roar, he lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air. "Get out of here!" Rhaegar shouted. Ilara barely had time to react as the blast from Cathar's weapon singed the wall next to her. The team opened fire on the commander, but it was clear they were no match for his speed and strength. He was unstoppable. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. Ilara's mind raced, her thoughts focused on one singular truth. The galaxy needed her to finish this. With every ounce of strength, Ilara twisted the terminal's interface, overriding the final barriers. And then, with a final shuddering breath, the system collapsed. Cathar's growl echoed through the chamber, but it was too late. The cure was now under control, and the Jarath's ability to use it was gone. For the first time since this madness began, Ilara allowed herself to breathe.